The mid-1960s in Hollywood was a time of breathtaking transition, an era where the fading echoes of studio system glamour collided head-on with the raw, unpredictable energy of a new television age. Studios were churning out dreams, painting a veneer of flawless perfection over a town built on illusion, secrets, and relentless ambition. Audiences sat captivated in their living rooms, longing for an escape from the growing anxieties of the real world. And in the autumn of 1964, the networks delivered the ultimate escape, a brightly lit, sun-drenched paradise where 7 completely different souls were stranded together on an uncharted tropical shore. Far from the reach of civilization, on the surface, it was a beautifully simple premise. A 3-hour tour turned into an enduring television legend, a weekly masterclass in slapstick comedy, warmth, and easy laughter. Millions tuned in to watch the chaotic antics of a clumsy first mate, the booming exasperation of a big-hearted captain, the steady brilliance of a calm scientist, and the sweet innocence of a Midwest farm girl. There was an impossibly wealthy millionaire couple who managed to maintain high society elegance amidst coconut trees, and, of course, a dazzling movie star who wrapped herself in Hollywood luxury even when trapped thousands of miles from a movie studio. They made the world believe that paradise was a place where nobody ever truly got hurt, and where the greatest threat was merely another ruined rescue plan. But behind the vivid colors of the television screen and the infectious laughter tracks lay a far more complicated reality. The brilliant lights of the sound stages often cast deep shadows, concealing the heavy burdens carried by the very actors who made the world smile. For some, the island that brought them immortal fame would eventually become a gilded cage, a beautiful prison of typecasting that threatened to swallow their hard-fought careers whole. Others hid profound personal histories, real-world scars from global conflicts, or the quiet ache of fading youth beneath the layers of elaborate makeup and impeccable comedic timing. As the cameras rolled and the tropical fantasy took hold of the public imagination, the boundaries between the performers and their iconic alter egos began to blur in ways none of them could have anticipated. They were Hollywood royalty, seasoned stage veterans, and rising stars who stepped onto a simulated beach, unsuspecting that this specific voyage would define the rest of their lives. The laughter was loud, the ratings were spectacular, but just off-camera, a delicate dance of pride, hidden frustration, and unspoken drama was quietly unfolding. To truly understand the legacy of this legendary shipwreck, one must look past the perfect facade of the pristine shoreline and peer into the complicated lives of the lost idols who breathed life into paradise. The journey to that fateful simulated shoreline began in the crowded, competitive casting offices of early 1960s Los Angeles, where a disparate group of performers gathered, each carrying their own histories, triumphs, and secret anxieties. To understand the complex alchemy that created this legendary television family, one must look at the wildly different paths they walked before stepping onto the soundstage. Natalie Schafer arrived as a grand dame of the theatre and cinema, a woman born at the turn of the 20th century in New Jersey, who had spent decades meticulously cultivating an aura of supreme, unassailable refinement. In a town notoriously cruel to women as they aged, she fiercely guarded the secret of her true birth year, stepping onto the island at 64 years old while possessing the radiant energy and sharp comedic timing of a woman half her age. Beside her stood Jim Backus, already a beloved icon of American radio and the unmistakable voice of the animated Mr. Magoo. Backus was a man of immense intellect and high society wit, and together with Schafer, they formed a comedic partnership that felt like a relic of old Hollywood elegance stranded in a modern, fast-paced television landscape. Their on-screen marriage as the Howells was defined by a beautiful, aristocratic detachment from reality. But behind the scenes, these two seasoned professionals were acutely aware of the changing industry tides. Navigating a medium that increasingly favored youthful novelty over theatrical pedigree, while the millionaires brought the sophisticated rhythms of high society, the physical heart of the vessel belonged to men shaped by entirely different realities. Alan Hale Junior walked onto the set carrying the immense, sometimes suffocating legacy of his father, a legendary Hollywood character actor of the silent and golden eras. Determined to carve out his own identity, the younger Hale poured boundless physical energy into the role of the big-hearted captain, masking the grueling physical demands of non-stop slapstick comedy beneath the booming, infectious laugh that became his signature. Yet, the relentless production schedule took its toll, demanding exhausting level of physical resilience from a man who had to constantly balance broad comedy with a genuine paternal warmth. Standing shoulder to shoulder with him was Russell Johnson, a man whose real-world discipline ran far deeper than any studio script. A decorated World War II bombardier who had survived a terrifying crash landing in the Pacific, Johnson brought a quiet, grounded gravity to the character of the professor. The profound irony was never lost on Johnson, a man who had faced actual mortality in the skies over war-torn oceans. Now tasked with maintaining absolute dramatic sincerity while explaining how to construct long-distance radios and complex tidal gauges from hollowed-out coconuts and bamboo. The true epicenter of the backstage intrigue, however, belonged to the shimmering movie star herself, Tina Louise. Trained at the prestigious Actors Studio in New York under the exacting eyes of the industry's greatest drama coaches, she arrived in Hollywood with the expectations and ambition of a serious, classical leading lady. When she signed her contract to portray the glamorous Ginger Grant, she had been led to believe the series would be a sophisticated, sharp-witted satire built around her character. A vehicle that would elevate her to the cinematic heights of Marilyn Monroe or Rita Hayworth. Instead, as the cameras began to roll, she found herself trapped in a world dominated by pie-throwing, quicksand traps, and broad, childlike slapstick. The studio lens demanded absolute, unblemished perfection from her, requiring her red hair to remain flawlessly coiffed and her shimmering evening gowns to stay immaculate against the artificial dirt of the soundstage. This created a grueling double standard, forcing her to endure the immense physical discomfort of a tropical set, while embodying a pure, unbothered fantasy of classic Hollywood allure. The growing realization that her dramatic talents were being eclipsed by a caricature created an undercurrent of silent frustration that rippled through the production. Balancing this high-stakes tension were the relative newcomers who brought an unforced authenticity to the ensemble. Dawn Wells, a former Miss Nevada, infused the character of Mary Ann Summers with a genuine, bright-eyed sweetness that could not be manufactured by studio publicity departments. She was the perfect narrative foil to the sultry, high-maintenance allure of the movie star. Yet behind the scenes, the entertainment press began to manufacture a subtle, unspoken rivalry, introducing the eternal question of the glamorous star versus the wholesome girl next door. This public division placed an invisible wedge between the two actresses, even as they worked side by side in the close quarters of the studio. Meanwhile, Bob Denver, a quiet, intensely private man who had already tasted mainstream television success, bore the monumental pressure of carrying the show's physical comedy on his slender shoulders. As the titular first mate, he was the nominal star of the enterprise, yet he possessed a rare, innate humility, constantly fighting the network executives to ensure that his fellow castmates received equal billing and recognition. Denver understood early on that the fragile magic of the show depended entirely on the collective harmony of the ensemble. Even as the studio sought to exploit individual identities for commercial gain, as the first season progressed and the show transformed into a runaway ratings juggernaut, the initial excitement of production began to give way to the repetitive, clockwork strain of the sitcom formula. The cast found themselves filming grueling 14-hour days under oppressive, overheating studio lights, breathing in the artificial dust of an indoor lagoon that grew less magical with each passing week. The scripts demanded that they remain frozen in time, trapped in a perpetual loop of near rescues and comic failures that allowed no room for true character development or emotional evolution. Colorful guest stars began to rotate through the produce, bringing brief flashes of eccentric outside energy to the set. Performers like Hans Conried, embodying the theatrical grandeur of the unreliable aviator Wrongway Feldman, or Denny Miller, bringing the sun-bronzed energy of the Golden Coast as the surfer Duke Williams, offered dazzling, temporary sparks to the narrative. Yet, when the director yelled "cut" at the end of each episode, the guest stars would pack their bags and return to the broader Hollywood landscape, leaving the core 7 actors right back where they started. stranded on the same patch of artificial sand. A creeping realization began to settle over the actors that the iconic characters they portrayed were becoming far more real to the public than the living, breathing individuals beneath the costumes. A gold-plated trap where the glittering promise of television immortality was slowly closing its doors on their future professional horizons. The brilliant illusion of paradise came to a shattering, unceremonious end in the spring of 1967, catching the entire cast completely off guard and exposing the cold, calculating underbelly of the Hollywood studio system. For 3 seasons, the series had dominated the television ratings, cementing its place as a cornerstone of American popular culture and preparing the actors for what everyone assumed would be a guaranteed 4th season. Scripts had already been commissioned, vacation plans had been made, and the actors had even begun looking for homes closer to the studio lot. But behind the closed doors of executive boardrooms at CBS, far removed from the sunlit warmth of the simulated island beach, a ruthless corporate drama was playing out. In a sudden and shocking maneuver that would become legendary in the annals of broadcasting history, the network patriarch William Paley made a unilateral decision to save his wife's favorite television western, Gunsmoke, which was facing cancellation. To clear a prestigious time slot for the fading cowboy drama, Paley simply wiped the stranded castaways off the network schedule with a single stroke of a pen. The cast did not receive a grand farewell, a celebratory wrap party, or even a direct notification from the studio executives. Instead, they discovered they had been permanently cancelled through trade publications and hurried phone calls from their agents, a brutal reminder that in the golden age of television, actors were ultimately just disposable commodities on a corporate ledger. The abrupt cancellation unlocked a deeper, far more insidious tragedy for the performers, transforming their beloved on-screen identities into an inescapable professional curse. Almost overnight, the very industry that had celebrated their comedic genius closed its doors to them, as casting directors and studio heads across Hollywood suddenly viewed the cast through a lens of absolute, unwavering typecasting. The actors discovered to their horror that the characters they had inhabited so perfectly had effectively erased their true identities in the eyes of the public and the entertainment establishment. Hale Junior found that no matter how fiercely he tried to audition for serious dramatic roles or gritty westerns, directors could only see the booming, jovial presence of the skipper, leaving him with no choice but to embrace the character permanently, even donning the signature captain's hat in his private life and at his personal restaurant venture to appease adoring fans. Russell Johnson experienced a similar professional paralysis. His sharp intelligence and commanding presence, which had once served him so well in theatrical features, were now permanently tethered to the eccentric, coconut-based science of the professor, dry docking his ambitions of returning to serious dramatic acting. The studio system, meanwhile, maintained a carefully orchestrated silence regarding the cast's professional struggles, eager to protect the pristine, joyful image of the franchise as it transitioned into the highly lucrative world of global syndication. The most profound and enduring fracture behind the closed doors of this television paradise, however, belonged to the show's glamorous resident movie star, Tina Louise. For her, the sudden demise of the series was not just a professional disappointment, but the culmination of a deeply painful psychological trap that had alienated her from her fellow cast members for years. Louise had entered the series with the understanding that she would be the central focus of a sophisticated satirical comedy. But she watched with growing resentment as the scripts pivoted entirely toward the lowbrow slapstick antics of Bob Denver's character. She felt profoundly deceived by the producers, believing that the role of Ginger Grant had effectively assassinated her credibility as a serious, method-trained dramatic actress. The tension on the set had grown so palpable during the final season that she routinely isolated herself in her dressing room between takes, refusing to socialize or share meals with the rest of the ensemble. When the cancellation was announced, Louise made a fierce, unyielding vow to distance herself from the island forever, blaming the series for completely destroying her cinematic aspirations. For decades afterward, she flatly refused to participate in the highly publicized television reunion movies, talk show specials, or cast retrospectives, becoming a haunting, beautiful ghost in the show's legacy. While her refusal fueled a relentless barrage of tabloid speculation regarding a bitter, permanent feud with her former co-stars, beneath the artistic frustrations lay an even darker financial betrayal that the studios worked tirelessly to keep hidden from the public eye. In the mid-1960s, television contracts were notoriously exploitive, drafted by studio lawyers to ensure that the lion's share of profits remained firmly in corporate coffers. The actors had signed agreements that paid them standard salaries during the initial production run, with a strictly limited clause for residuals that expired after only a handful of reruns. As the series entered global syndication, turning into an unprecedented financial goldmine that generated hundreds of millions of dollars for the network and the studio owners, the actors who had sacrificed their careers to create these iconic roles received absolutely nothing. The public, seeing the castaways on their television screens day after day, year after year, naturally assumed the actors were living in immense wealth and Hollywood luxury. In reality, many of them found themselves struggling to secure basic acting work, trapped in a cruel paradox where they were among the most famous faces in the entire world, yet unable to pay their mortgages or secure standard healthcare benefits. The contrast between the sun-drenched, carefree paradise broadcast into millions of homes and the quiet, stressful financial realities of the actors' lives was a closely guarded industry secret, a masterclass in Hollywood illusion that kept the public smiling while the artists paid the ultimate price. This collective professional exile forged a complex, deeply emotional bond among the castaways, who found that they were the only people on Earth who truly understood the unique weight of their shared golden cage. While Tina Louise chose the path of total alienation, seeking refuge in the New York theater scene and independent film projects that deliberately subverted her glamorous sitcom image, the rest of the cast gradually leaned into the affection of their global audience. Bob Denver, a man of immense gentleness, carried the burden of being the literal face of the franchise with extraordinary grace, constantly defending his castmates and attempting to use his personal leverage to secure better financial terms for them during the rare reunion projects. Yet, even Denver could not escape the reality that his career had been permanently arrested at the age of 29 on that artificial beach. The actors had to watch from the sidelines as a new generation of Hollywood stars rose to prominence, while they remained frozen in time, forever wearing the same costumes, speaking the same lines, and executing the same comedic routines for nostalgic audiences. The island had ceased to be a simple television set. It had evolved into a profound psychological landscape that defined their relationships, dictated their fortunes, and held their identities hostage in the glittering archives of television history. The passage of time has a strange, distorting effect on the artifacts of popular culture, transforming what was once dismissed as fleeting television whimsy into a sacred monument of national nostalgia. As the decades marched forward, the bright, saturated colors of the island remained frozen in a permanent mid-1960s afternoon, while the actors themselves stepped quietly into the twilight of their lives, carrying the immense weight of their legacy with a mixture of grace, quiet resignation, and unexpected triumph. The contrast between the eternal, sun-drenched youth of syndication and the inevitable vulnerability of the human condition became the final, most poignant chapter in the story of these forgotten idols. For Bob Denver, the man who embodied the very spirit of gentle, well-meaning chaos, the later years of life were spent far from the aggressive glare of the Hollywood spotlights. Retiring to the serene, rolling hills of West Virginia with his family, Denver embraced a life of peaceful obscurity, operating a small, whimsical oldies radio station and dedicating himself to charitable causes. He never harbored bitterness toward the red shirt and white sailor hat that had defined his existence. Instead, he treated Gilligan with the protective affection of an older brother, understanding that he had gifted the world a symbol of pure, unadulterated innocence. When he passed away in 2005 at the age of 70, a quiet sorrow rippled through generations of viewers who realized that the eternal first mate had finally slipped away from the shore, leaving behind a legacy of absolute, uncomplicated joy. The bond between the captain and his mate extended far beyond the boundaries of the studio lot. reflecting a deep, real-world devotion that mirrored their legendary on-screen chemistry. Alan Hale Jr. faced his final years with the exact same booming courage and emotional generosity that made the skipper an American institution. In a final chapter that seems almost poetic, Hale became a celebrated restaurateur in Los Angeles, routinely greeting patrons while wearing his authentic captain's hat, eagerly taking photographs and exchanging warm embraces with anyone who stepped through his doors. Even as he secretly battled a terminal illness, he would routinely slip into full costume to visit sick children in local hospitals, using the magical aura of the skipper to bring laughter to those facing their darkest hours. When he vanished from the horizon in 1990 at the age of 68, his ashes were appropriately scattered into the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. A final, majestic voyage for a man who had guided millions toward happiness. Close behind him was his aristocratic partner in comedy, Jim Backus, who spent his final years waging a courageous, highly publicized battle against Parkinson's disease. Alongside his devoted wife, Backus transformed his personal struggles into a series of deeply moving, humorous books, proving that the sophisticated wit of Thurston Howell III was not merely a scripted character, but a fundamental part of his brilliant soul until his passing in 1989. Perhaps the most fascinating and delicious irony of the entire Castaways saga belonged to the elegant Natalie Schafer, whose real life defied the very caricature of the pampered, helpless socialite she portrayed with such exquisite precision. While audiences laughed at Lovey Howell's complete detachment from practical reality, Schafer was secretly engineered as one of the shrewdest, most successful real estate investors in the history of Beverly Hills. Long before she ever stepped onto the simulated island, she had quietly amassed a monumental fortune by purchasing prime California property during the golden era of the studio system. When she passed away in 1991 at the magnificent age of 90, having successfully kept her true birth year a secret from the public for almost her entire career, she left behind a staggering multi-million-dollar empire. In a gesture of profound, maternal generosity that surprised the industry, she bequeathed a vast portion of her wealth to her beloved co-star, Dawn Wells, and designated the remainder to fund a specialized wing at the Motion Picture and Television Country House and Hospital, ensuring that her old-world elegance would forever provide sanctuary for aging entertainers who had fallen on hard times. Dawn Wells herself became the ultimate custodian of the show's enduring flame, spending her post-Iceland decades traveling the world, writing nostalgic cookbooks, teaching young actors, and remaining fiercely unyielding grateful for the enduring love of her fans until her own departure in 2020 at 82 years old, forever cementing Marianne as the ultimate symbol of American warmth and comfort television. The tapestry of this timeless paradise was also woven with the brilliant, often underappreciated contributions of a rotating constellation of character actors and eccentric geniuses who provided the vital gravity and chaos necessary to keep the island spinning. Russell Johnson lived out his long, dignified post-war life in the quiet majesty of Washington State, writing an elegant memoir that celebrated the wonderfully absurd science of the professor while expressing a deep, humbled gratitude for the permanent place he occupied in the hearts of working-class families. The towering presence of Richard Kiel leveraged his brief, Cold War comedic turn into a legendary cinematic career, achieving global immortality as the steel-jawed assassin Jaws in the James Bond franchise before his passing in 2014. The theatrical grandeur of Hans Conried as the hopelessly lost aviator Wrongway Feldman, and the sharp, dangerous nightclub energy of Don Rickles as the fast-talking conman Norbert Wiley, remained legendary touchstones of an era when television could seamlessly blend high-art performance with broad family sitcoms. Yet, tragedy also touched the outer edges of this paradise. The immense physical genius of Janos Prohaska, who had brought such expressive, wordless life to the chaotic island gorilla, was stolen away far too soon in a devastating 1974 plane crash, while trailblazing performers like Eddie Little Sky left behind a quiet, monumental legacy of representation that gradually forced a changing Hollywood to look at indigenous actors with the respect and dignity they rightfully deserved. Entering the mid-2010s and pushing into the contemporary landscape of 2026, The passing of decades has slowly cleared the stage, leaving behind a solitary, magnificent sentinel to guard the memories of that faraway shore. At 92 years old, Tina Louise stands alone as the final surviving original cast member of the SS Minnow, a living bridge to an era of glamorous illusion and television history that has completely vanished from the modern world. The fierce, decades-long resentment that once caused her to distance herself from the ghost of Ginger Grant has gently mellowed into a profound, elegant truce with her own history. In her quiet reflections, she has come to recognize that the shimmering, red-haired movie star she created was not a weapon that destroyed her career, but a timeless gift that bestowed upon her an immortal place in the collective consciousness of humanity. Today, the legendary shipwreck of 1964 is no longer viewed as a simple, repetitive comedy about seven stranded souls. It is recognized as a masterwork of escapism, a cultural sanctuary that reminds us of a time when the world felt smaller. The laughter felt kinder, and paradise was a place we never truly wanted to leave. The actors who breathed life into these forgotten idols may have completed their earthly voyages, but the vessel they built remains permanently anchored in the golden archives of the human heart, forever resistant to the tides of time. Breaking retrospective report. Inside the Hollywood Gilded Cageth, reality behind Paradise exposed. New documentation and historical analysis reveal the severe professional and financial tolls endured by the cast of the 1960s cultural phenomenon. Gilligan's Island, Contrate Acts, network manipulation by CBS patriarch William Paley abruptly ended the top-rated comedy in 1967 solely to protect the Western drama Gunsmoke, leaving the cast blindsided and permanently unemployed. The residual exploitation due to predatory mid-century studio contracts. Iconic stars like Robert Joseph Denver and Hale Junior received zero long-term residual compensation from the hundreds of millions of dollars generated by global syndication. The silent feud, dramatic actress Tina Louise maintained a strict, decades-long estrangement from her co-stars, privately citing the complete assassination of her serious cinematic aspirations by the show's lowbrow, slapstick format. Their sole sentinel, moving into 2026. 92-year-old Tina Louise stands as the final surviving original cast member, serving as a living bridge to a vanished golden era of television illusion and hidden industry heartbreak.